Hello, everyone. So today we have a different kind of video on each of our channels. I am Hunter Salazar. I am joined by Angela. It's good to speak to you, Angela. We both have spiritual
Hi,
channels, so it's a little bit different, but yeah, it's good to talk to you today.
Hi. Folks on my channel, we have Hunter with us. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Angela from Sanctuary Satanica. I make satanic occulty videos and stuff like that. So today we're going to talk about a topic that is fairly important to each of us, and we hope that y'all have the patience and compassion to listen to this topic that is very near and dear to our hearts.
Excellent. Yeah, and we're going to talk about Palestine today. And I just want to let you know, Angela, that I can now there was a little option that I clicked, and now we can see each other completely.
Oh, nice. There we
go. But yeah. So anyway, we're going to talk about Palestine and all the atrocities that have been going on in relation to the war on Gaza. So Israel has been attacking Gaza ever since October 7th, and Palestine, or people in Palestine, you could say Hamas, basically invaded Israel and did awful things as far as atrocities go, as far as killing innocent civilians. And it was awful. It was terrible. And I remember following this and really looking at all the information that was coming in on on various YouTube channels, and I looked at various news outlets. What I noticed in the West, in the United States, which we both are, is that CNN, Fox News, all the mainstream media was very much focused on what Israel suffered, and then they kept on focusing on that, and then they still have not shown nearly as much of what has been happening towards Gaza and Palestine since then. It's been very edited. You can really feel that all the mainstream media in the United States is very, very much it's very much on point, and it almost also feels like the Republican Democratic parties. You're also seeing how similar they are, and how when foreign policy is concerned, and when the military industrial complex is concerned, there is a message that politicians, obviously on Democratic and Republican sides, they're very similar, but even the mainstream media outlets are just focused on not showing what other outlets are showing, as far as what the Israelis are doing to the IDF are doing to in Gaza. There has been, at this point, I think there's been 23 to 25,000 deaths in Gaza, which is a huge portion of the population. That's only about about 2.5 million, I believe.
That's not even counting the West Bank and Palestinians that are not currently in those areas, or any of the history before October 7th. I don't know. I should have asked before we went on recording if you censor any words on your channel. I censor nothing.
I don't.
So I'll call it what it is. It's a fucking genocide. I remember because I've sort of been attempting to educate myself about Israel-Palestine for a few years, but I always felt like it was because everybody always talked about it being this big, complicated thing. And so I never really jumped into it, and I had my own thoughts. I had my own feelings about what was going on, but I didn't really have the facts yet. And I remember when October 7th, all those events happened, and I just clicked on the first news thing I saw. And what I remember was this, I think it was MSNBC, was attempting to be non-biased, and with its messaging, and in its centrism is where I noticed the actual bias, which was interesting. They were showing clips of a hospital in Israel and clips of hospitals in Palestine. And I remember that the Israeli hospital was fucking empty. I remember it was fucking empty. It had lights on. They claimed that these bombs always hit this window. This window was untouched. And they claimed that people were in a bomb shelter. I was like, okay, maybe patients really are in a bomb shelter, but I don't see any doctors out here. I don't see anybody really working. But the Palestinian hospital, by contrast, had limited power, I think at the time. Now it has no power, limited electricity, people everywhere. Beds were full, people were on the ground, everyone was running around in a panic. And I remember they had put these two shots side by side and were like, look, see, both are suffering. And I was like, my own eyes are telling me something else, and I'm going to look further into this, and I'm going to keep educating myself on this. And I came across, like, more and more history, interviews from people who were former IDF soldiers from 15 years ago, exposing the real agenda going on, exposing this plan to displace people from their homes, exposing this plan to shoot civilians, even shoot dead bodies long after they've been killed. And so based on my knowledge of how the West tends to treat the Middle East, anything that's like blanket labeled terrorism seems to be a reaction to Western occupation and Western colonization and Western violence. I'm not excusing acts of terrorism, of course. I'm not like going to endorse these things as people accuse you of doing when you defend Palestine. But I cannot, abide by children being bombed and being starved and being denied basic hygiene. There was a man I saw the other day sharing about how there are women without menstrual products. That's something that's not being talked about at all right now. And for women of that culture to not have the dignity to clean themselves up is embarrassing. And a lot of women, you'll notice, are wearing their prayer garments all the time in case they are bombed, so that they are dignified when they are dead. So they are essentially wearing their funeral clothes all the time. And there's no comparison to me, between like Israeli citizens who, for the most part, are very comfortable, and are very comfortable crying on camera for money and all these things that they're doing right now, versus people who are in their funeral clothes constantly picking children out of rubble with their bare hands because they're not allowed to have construction tools to rebuild anything or to move anything. So to me, it's a very clear-cut power imbalance, aside from like, occupation. I know you didn't want to focus too much on the states, but to me, like, that is kind of part of the power imbalance there. And what really drew me to talk about this topic with anybody, but especially like with another practitioner of sorts, was that I felt like I wasn't seeing enough people besides the awesome Kellyanne Maddox and a few people in my smaller circles of smaller platforms talking about the current events and talking about what is going on. And I found that a lot of people with larger platforms didn't want to risk, controversy or whatever, and hide themselves away and just like pray it all away and just be positive. And I just find that so hypocritical. I just feel like if you're going to stand here as a healer, if you're going to stand here between worlds, like, this is part of the collective shadow work we all must do. And I feel really inspired actually by the global revolution that is coming out of people standing against this violence. So hopefully we can further that today,
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
there's a whole lot of things that stick out, and things that you mentioned as well. So the amount of bombs just dropped. So first of all, the Gaza is the most densely packed area on the entire planet. Also, almost 50% of the population is below the age of 18. People do not live very long, and a lot of them are very new. The reason, and one of the reasons for that, is that they have not been able to really leave in any big way. They're kept in this place in Gaza for the blockade's been going for at least 15 years, where the Israelis have been controlling the amount of water that they get, the food that they get. They only basically get humanitarian aid, and they control their power, their energy. They can't form any kind of businesses or that have any relationship to the outside. They are 100% reliant upon humanitarian aid, and even that is the only the amount of aid that Israel allows in. And they can cut off the water anytime, and they have multiple times. They can cut off the electricity anytime. They have multiple times. But since the attack on Gaza had begun, I think just in northern Gaza, in the first few weeks, they dropped like 2 million tons of bombs in this highly densely populated area, whose almost 50% of the population is below the age of 18. The rules for engagement seem to be just non-existent, in the sense that if there's a single person with a gun in a building, there might not be anybody with a gun in a building, but even if there's that one, it seems like they're willing to level a building that has hundreds of people in it. It almost seems like blind rage. And one thing that really speaks to it not just being focused on Gaza and it being more of a territory grab, and the force being excessive is that on the West Bank, where Hamas has no control, they don't have a footing, they don't have like representation there. In fact, the people in charge of the West Bank are the ones that the Israelis have talked about putting in charge of Gaza once this war is over. But I doubt they're going to give back Gaza to any Palestinians, but we'll see what happens. But on the West Bank, the Israeli settlers, ever since this has happened with Gaza, they've been grabbing more and more land. There is absolutely, and actually this has been shown and also proven to be illegal by the UN, and the United States has also cut off travel visas to any settlers Israeli settlers who are in the West Bank grabbing land, because there's no legal basis for it, and they're not taking it from Hamas. They're not attacking, but the Israeli, not only the Israeli settlers, but the Israeli military, the IDF, has been seizing parts of the West Bank and even forcing doctors and nurses to exit a hospital at gunpoint so that they can take more of the West Bank. There is no military operation going there. They're just grabbing land. There's no even reason for them to be there. In fact, they don't even want to address it. When they do address it, they talk about Muslim terrorists. They don't even identify. They just identify them as Muslims, and they keep on saying things like, "Oh, Hamas is as bad as ISIS," and anybody who's on the West Bank, who's in suspicion of any kind of terrorism, is Hamas, which is as bad as ISIS, and all these equivalencies to say that they can just do whatever they want in response to that original attack, without any limitations, without any rules of war.
Yeah, and to add to that, because I recently had seen some events going on in the West Bank where they're just bulldozing over, like through streets. They're tearing up entire streets. And prior to that, I had seen them, the IDF, rip up cemeteries of Palestinian bodies. And this is undoubtedly an act of genocide to me, because they are erasing evidence of them ever existing. That is what they're attempting to do by tearing up their streets, by tearing up their dead, and not allowing them to bury their current dead. There's a bunch of bodies in their prisons right now that they have not released back to their families. There are children still buried under rubble that we are unable to locate. There's they are trying to erase history of these people existing. We have to remember that Gaza and the West Bank are not traditional regions of Palestine. The entire land that is now occupied was considered Palestine. These are occupational areas of colonization that they are confined to and forced into, that most people living in Gaza or surviving by a threat in Gaza, I should say, are not from there. They are from other parts of Palestine that have been shoved into that place because the rest of Palestine has been invaded by settlers who just go in at gunpoint and shove people out of their homes. There's a good documentary, I can remember what it was called. It was about a certain area that was just seized by the IDF, and they are interviewing only Israeli people. And you can see from just the recounts of these Israeli soldiers and their families, the lack of remorse, the lack of compassion, and the complete brainwashing of fascist ideology that is instilled through the military, that is very common in the United States, it's common in the Ukraine, and is common in Britain. And when you look at these IDF soldiers whose identities have been revealed in part, most of them are from these countries. They are not from the Middle East. They're not native to this area at all. They're all people recruited from the US, the Ukraine, Britain, like all these countries that have fascist tendencies to them, which is interesting. There's so much history and there's so much pain, but I feel like people want to get like muddied up in that or say that it's overcomplicated or whatever. We have to remember, again, I know we didn't want to talk too much about the states, but we have to remember that Israel was formed to force Jews into one place, force Jews into one place in the world instead of allowing Jews to exist globally as they should. So I don't want to hear from anybody on my side or anywhere else that it's anti-Semitic to be on the Palestinian side. I, for one, believe that Israel itself is an anti-Semitic institution. Netanyahu himself is a Holocaust denier. Like, he's not, somebody who has a lot of compassion for people who've survived the Holocaust. And I'm really sick of seeing Israeli propagandists exploit that. I know that American Jews are smarter than that. When I go to protests locally, we have the Jewish Voices for Peace standing beside us. This is not something that the majority of people anywhere wants. And I'm very inspired in a weird way by the plight of Palestinian people for continuing to fight for basically 80 years. And now are finally being heard around the world, and it's begun this sort of global revolution of hope and of standing up against genocide in various other countries. And it's calling attention to genocide and gentrification, displacement, even in the United States, that I feel like not enough people talk about. But in terms of getting aid to these people, it's extremely difficult. One of the documentaries I watched about Palestinian survival was that they were trying to fish, they're right by the ocean, and they're trying to fish and they get gunned down. Their ships get gunned down. I don't think they have any ships left over anymore. But just something that should be as free as the ocean, as free as the sea in their own waters to get food, like to be prevented from that. I don't see how that's war. I don't
because
see
of the blockade. Yeah, it's because of the blockade. They're not letting them to go beyond even a certain amount of water that they can go into, and it's international waters. Israel doesn't own those waters out there, but they're not letting them out in any direction. But yeah. So the Israel, it was founded as a state. Palestinians, whether it be a nation or not, because I don't know if it was called Palestine back then, but people were living there. People were living there for at least hundreds of years. But they were forced out when Israel was founded directly after World War II, and people were just pushed out, and that's what started the first war. So they're being pushed further and further out of the land that they were in. And yeah, so it was almost like all the empires at the time around World War II and just before wanted to give Israel land, but they also wanted not people to resettle back where they came from, but to go to this one area and force them to this one area. But there is huge fascist tendencies in Netanyahu's government. And right before all of this happened, he took away power from the Supreme Court. And he's been, I believe that he's been the leader and been, I'm elected, I believe, but he's been leader for over 20 years. It's been so long. He's been in charge for so long. And there was huge outrage, even in Palestine, even in Israel, when he took away powers from the Supreme Court. And he is not popular, even in Israel right now. Netanyahu is not popular in Israel. There's more and more people frustrated in Israel about, why aren't they trying to make more hostage deals? Why can't we have some kind of ceasefire? Even at this point, they've gained so much, even if there's some kind of buffer area. Let's say that they wanted some kind of military buffer zone. They have so much. And it seems like the lies and the focus of Netanyahu's government is just completely focused on grabbing as much land as possible and no acknowledgement for any of the civilians in Gaza. So they say at first they said, okay, you can go from North Gaza to South Gaza. But then they bombed them on the way there. They bombed all the buses on the way to South Gaza. Now that they're in South Gaza, it's like, okay, we're not going to bomb South. But now that they're bombing South Gaza, there's nowhere for them to go. There's all of these innocent civilians are stuck in these little sections of desert without any buildings, just on the far edge of this bombing. And the Israelis continue to bomb even the tents that offer no protection. And there's women, and once again, the almost 50% of the population below the age of 18, that's one of the highest areas in the world of children that are being bombed in tents. Now, the Israelis have not even given them a place to go to where there's no bombs. Where does Israel expect them to go if they will not let them leave the area at all? They just expect them to be bombed, and they're not keeping track of the amount of civilians that they kill. You hear again and again and again by the IDF that, it's the Hamas's appointed health ministry that's giving these numbers about the civilians, but you're not keeping track of them. And they're only cataloging, and they're just keep on anteing up this number of Hamas operatives. They're not keeping track of the amount of civilians that they kill. So they're just basically creating this kill zone. And they're honestly, even on an imperial level, they're not gaining any resources. This is purely just a land grab. And it's completely, honestly, racist and just ethnically cleansing. They don't even really gain anything but a buffer zone. It's completely absurd. And there's more and more outrage in Israel itself, and I'm looking forward to seeing Netanyahu's government eventually being like pushed out by the Israelis that are more and more angry at this, because nobody's really happy, even
and
on
I
the
think
far
that's
right.
something like a lot of people get lost in this when we criticize the government and the state of Israel, is that we can't forget that, like, yes, Israel is a diverse population, and there are plenty of people who are against this, but are unable to speak out because they are completely censored. They are punished. They are beaten in the street. We have seen Orthodox Jews protesting this quote unquote war and being beaten in the street by the IDF, like being beaten in the street by the police. So it's not representative of the Jewish community. It's not representative of even the Israeli community. It is simply just the agenda of a fascist government and the people brainwashed by it, most of whom are not even, like, most of whom are previously not even fucking Israeli citizens. Most of whom are from other fucking countries.
I
So,
find it extremely strange that right before the attack happened, like days before, Netanyahu moved a bunch of soldiers that were on the Gaza border into the West Bank in order to shore up security there just days before. To where he just kind of like left it open, just very few troops right there. And then also, this is a huge. So the IDF has one of the best, you can call it like they have best one of the CIA equivalents, where it's like and counterintelligence and intelligence communities in the world. And it was such a huge failure that I find it extremely odd that they didn't get even a whiff of this when Hamas was releasing videos literally online showing training, whether it be paragliders or whether it be having certain boats or motorcycles, all this training and all this activity in Gaza and trained abroad as well, but in Gaza. And they just didn't even get a whiff of it. It was so strange. Even the cameras on those automated machine guns, they were so out of date, even by IDF standards. Even IDF soldiers have come out being like, these cameras have not been updated. It just seems extremely strange. I don't know, correlation is not causation, but it does seem extremely strange. And it happened just directly after that grab from the Supreme Court and Netanyahu's, favorability in Israel just going really far down. But it also feels like that Israel is, whoever's in favor of this continued military action, not all of Israel is, but whoever is in favor of it, it's creating tension in the Middle East directly around them because they're surrounded by, quote unquote enemies. It's creating more and more hatred and tension and directly around them. And they were gonna sign a treaty, basically a trade treaty, right before this happened with Saudi Arabia. Now that's been pulled out of. And then there's all this animosity created directly around them. Even if somebody's a selfish person, they gain nothing from this but a little bit of buffer zone and ethnic cleansing. And because it does feel very racist, and a lot of those settlers that they've allowed onto the West Bank, Israel's allowed onto the West Bank, and honestly even settled there, a lot of them I believe in this strange prophecy of pushing out the Palestinians from their land, and that the land is actually theirs. It's strange that this prophecy keeps on coming up, especially among these Israeli settlers on the West Bank. It's just really strange. So it does feel like ethnic cleansing. It does feel like genocide, and it does feel like a rejection of Palestinians as people, as a state, or even the rules of war. And the rules of war just being tossed out, and in a way that we have not seen in a long time, especially from a quote unquote first world country. But
I mean,
yeah,
like, Palestinians are not even the only ethnicity that have suffered in this land, because the Bedouins, who were indigenous to that land, have been completely pushed out. They are people with nothing to take. They have no land to take, and they just simply, killed or exiled them completely out. And it's bizarre because, like, there's no motivation to dig up dead bodies. There's no motivation to destroy cemeteries aside from true ethnic cleansing, not just from present, but from history. And that is a huge indicator in genocide. The IDF is using, I think, phosphorus gas, which is a war crime, which is banned by the United Nations. And they're just able to do so, I don't know, because of the US backing them, or because, like, the nuclear power or whatever it is, but the US is a huge factor in this, and it's extremely frustrating that I feel and I've noticed the majority of U.S. citizens really not standing with this. Even if there's people who are not super invested in this, they're not a fan of like war going on in the Middle East. And I just get so frustrated with people who say, well, what can I do about it? I'm like, well, you can start just with boycotting. It costs nothing to boycott. It costs no effort even to boycott. It's really simple. A few things off the top of my head being Coca-Cola, Starbucks, Disney. You're not missing anything with those. So you might as well.
I think that we should cap this section and do another section. But yeah, thank y'all very much for watching. Y'all will see us again in just a little bit. All right, let me